many people as he or she can before coming back to your own territory. And everybody you touch is dead and therefore out of the game. But if you are caught and held captive in the other person's territory, then of course you are out. And sometimes what happens is that when they grab you, they don't really grab you, they grab your shirt or your trousers or your skirt, depending on whether you're a man or a woman. And that tears, of course, as you scramble to get back to your side of your territory while they fight to hold you there. That's the background to the poem. Agility. Sometimes a poem springs full grown, flows from my pen as might a stream. But only sometimes my luck demands cut and trim and tack and glue and tape before the work's in shape to fly. But since I am an amateur working hard on other things, my life is like some crackleware. Poems peep and dash, daring me to catch them as in ImagoDei. Once when I thought I'd grabbed an arm, he twisted to escape, and all I held was nothing more, though nothing less, than a few poor threads of sleeve. Those fragments weave to form a home, a robe, a pair of wings. So that's one of my poems, Agility. And as you can see, there's nothing particularly spiritual about it. But on the other hand, it is a reference to how poetry can give us sometimes a home, make us feel comfortable with ourselves and with others, can give us a robe, something to cover ourselves with, feel warm, but also, of course, a robe doesn't just represent warmth. A robe represents somebody who has an office, somebody who is given certain authority and certain power. So a home, a robe, a pair of wings, something to fly with. So that's one of my poems. Let me see if I can switch around to a second one. And this requires me to move around from this to maybe I'll talk for a bit while I'm hunting for the other poem. Is that okay?
Sure.
So you know how my poems began with the very first poem, which was emotional, and therefore not, how shall I put it, unusual. A lot of poetry begins with the heart, begins with emotions. Some poetry begins with the head. And just while we're talking, Chuck, if you have the two poems of poetry there with you, do you? My two volumes of poetry?
Let me look, okay?
If you've got them, then maybe you could read one or two of them, and then I could comment on them. That might be one interesting way of doing it, or a different way of doing it. Okay. These two volumes of poetry of mine were published, of course, a long time ago. They were published in the 70s and 80s, so going back half a century in one case and 40 years in another case. So they are quite old. But I'm an occasional poet. I'm not a professional poet, and I do know some professional poets. One professional poet I know, whose work I actually published, whose last volume of poems I actually published, has just been declared the joint winner of a US $10,000 prize, literature prize, which could have been given to fiction or memoir or poetry, and has been given to his poetry volume, as well as to another poetry volume. This man, Mr. Sen, S-E-N, he spends at least 4 hours every day on poetry. And he, of course, sadly is not a believer yet, but he spends 4 hours a day, 7 days a week on poetry. So it's not very surprising that his poetry is that good. But my poetry is in the middle of a very busy life as a business consultant, an entrepreneur, a mentor, and so on. So my poetry is very scattered. I should also say that I haven't really been able to find my poetic voice. So I write poetry in different genres. I write poetry in different forms, and I write poetry of different styles, some of which is quite funny. And actually, this man, Mr. Sen, thinks that my best poems are my funny poems. Well, it's nice that some of your poems are thought to be good for whatever reason. So there you are. Chuck has found one of my volumes of poetry.
Yes. And what would you like me to read? Should I read
If you
the
pick one at
content?
random and read it, I'll be happy to comment on it.
Okay.
Go
Well,
ahead.
Okay, I'm doing it here, and I wish I could read it as well. Okay, here's New Year's Eve, 1973. So that's appropriate for us here. Okay. In a few moments, a year dies. A girl and a no seem to have dominated this swift space. 2 months were a whirl of very important activities. But you stopped me, rushing away from my pain, and as I quietened my heart, became still. I saw that I have not trusted myself to Godot, albeit painfully, unwillingly, that there are better plans for me. And now I mark time, wonder, like a wife might at a husband who has suddenly done something she does not understand, revealing another bit of his personality she did not know existed. Wonder what you have for me, the next step.
Mm-hmm. So you can see that that is a very autobiographical poem, unlike the first one I read, which is a general poem on the topic of course, it has autobiographical elements, but it's not really autobiographical, whereas this poem is highly autobiographical. It is rooted in a time and a place and a situation. Go on to a different one then, Chuck, if you don't mind.
Well, the next poem is entitled Letter to a Departed Friend.
Just before you go there, you can see that this poem that Chuck is going to read is also autobiographical because, of course, it was my friend who died, and this letter is written to her. I hope that unlike the very first poem that I read, which was not autobiographical, but not particularly spiritual, I hope that in the first poem that Chuck read, you could see that I was actually talking to God in the poem. So it was a poem that was also a prayer. Okay. Whereas in this poem that Chuck is going to read, it is a letter to this friend who's just died.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Letter to a departed friend. Released from your sick body, how does it finally feel to be whole again? In the kingdom you had owed allegiance to thus long. Viewing with uncurtained eye your suffering, its purpose, and all. Do you sorrow over lost opportunities? And what research are you pursuing now?
So you can see, hello, are you there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There we are. It got cut off for a moment. You can see that I'm taking seriously the fact that though my friend has died, I am conversing with her and I'm raising the question of, she was a very good, fine research scholar. And I'm raising the question of what she's doing in heaven, what kind of research she's pursuing in heaven. So taking the reality of heaven seriously. And that's pretty unusual in poetry, I think. But I hope that it makes a reader think, especially readers who are not believers, think, oh, heaven is not just clouds and guitars or harps or whatever, but maybe heaven is about something which gives us joy, something that we are good at, something that we would enjoy doing. Anyway, yes.
Mm.
You want to go on to another one, Chuck?
This is entitled On Pain. Having mastered the
I should say that a lot of my poetry is on pain of different sorts.
Mhm.
So when my friend said to me that your best poems are your funny ones, I found that quite ironic because I think that the poems in which I'm invested most deeply are actually my pain-related poems.
Mm.
But of course, unfortunately, the quality of the product does not always match the quantity or quality of the effort put in.
I think we all
Sorry.
know that in our
Yes.
own lives. Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay, on pain. Having mastered the art of detachment, not allowing what pained me to touch me, I found myself alienated from myself, insensitive to others, less than human. I begin to see what you meant by asking me to take up, demanding that I choose, feel the pain, both mine and that of others. For only thus may be broken down all that is merely human. Only thus may flow through me what is more than human.
So you can see that the poem is in two parts, as it were. The first part is, if you know about Indian tradition, if you know about Buddhism, if you know about yoga, and so on, you know the view of pain that is common in my tradition. And you can see that I am leaning against that tradition in the first part of the poem. And in the second part of the poem, I'm exploring the biblical view of pain as distinct from the Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, yogic, etc. view of pain. And I do often, well, I do sometimes do that because I think there's too much Christian poetry or too much biblical poetry that is in the ghetto, that is believers speaking to believers. And I'm trying to write quite often for the unbeliever. I'm writing quite often for the man or woman on the street who is not necessarily in line with my thinking at all. And what I'm hoping my poetry will do, if they bother to read it, if they come across it, is to just open their eyes a tiny little bit to things they might not otherwise be aware of or want to be aware of. Okay, Chuck, go on.
Mm-hmm. Prabhu, will there be a point where some of the others may want to comment or ask a question?
Oh, please, we can do it right away. We can do it
Okay.
right away.
Let me just throw that open right now.
Good.
I don't want to dominate, but I have a question.
Sure.
I would love to hear more about, the difference between writing a poem from a place of the heart versus the head, and how that affects then your, not just where it begins, but the process.
Well, the process, of course, can be quite similar. So today I saw a man, I was coming back from some shopping, and I saw a man sitting on a boundary wall, one of these low boundary walls, and I looked at him and I thought he has a gaunt and vacant look. He was obviously a vagabond. He had one of these trolley things with wheels. And I was just thinking about that, thinking he has a gaunt and vacant look. And I thought that's almost like a line from a poem. It scans perfectly. He has a gaunt and vacant look. He is not old nor young in truth. What does he here with bag on wheels? I spied him sit on boundary wall. I saw him walk the length of street. No aim, no speed. So you can see this kind of flowed out of me as I was just thinking about the first line as I observed him. He has a gaunt and vacant look, but I haven't finished it because the emotional impulse ran out at that point. And now if I want to do something with this, I have to work at it and maybe return to it some other time and re-enter the poem and re-enter the poem and rework it out from its beginning, or add to it as time goes on, or use reversal maybe, as I did in one of my poems, which we just read. So a poem can begin in your heart or your head, but very rarely does it come out complete, as I say, in fact, in the poem that I read. Poems need working at. And so what I'm trying to do in my poem is in my poetry is to make sure that it is structure, it has form, it has complexity, it has depth, it has irony, it has wit, whatever I can make it have. The difference between prose and poetry is that prose has one meaning. Prose is like a laser light. Poetry is not like that. Poetry is like a kaleidoscope. It is richness of meaning. You can think about it and you can say, oh, that's interesting. That word there links up with that word there. That phrase there throws light on that phrase there. So this is what you're trying to do with the poem. It's a work of art. You're making it into a work of art from having been perhaps not a very promising thing to begin with. Seeing somebody who's looking gaunt and vacant is not actually very poetic, is it? But what you hope is that by the time you're finished with the poem, it will be something rich and full and satisfying, of course, to me as an artist, as a poet, but also to the reader, that the reader, as he or she reads it, will find it rich and interesting, and maybe giving them an aha moment, maybe helping them to see what is familiar in a fresh way, or see something fresh for the first time, which they hadn't noticed before.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a similar thought. I've always thought of poetry as sort of like a flashlight in a dark room that enables you to see an object, notice an object in a way that you never would have noticed in broad daylight.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Good. Other questions, other comments, other thoughts?
I was interested in your comment about finding your voice. I think all of us, whatever our medium, are interested in that question. How, talk about that. Why do you feel you haven't found your voice completely? How will you know when you do or as you approach it?
I think I found voices for each poem. In other words, I think I found the right form for each of the poems that I'm working at, but that is different from having found your voice. So how shall I put it? If you see a painting by a particular art or by a well-known artist, you can usually see that the painting is by that artist, even though that artist has done 100 different paintings, because that artist's artistic mark in that painting is so clear. Maybe it's the choice of color, maybe it's the kinds of motifs being used. You know, Marc Chagall, you look at Marc Chagall and you know it's a Marc Chagall. Why do you know it's a Marc Chagall? Well, you know it's a Marc Chagall partly because of the colors, partly because of the motifs being used. And the feeling that comes across from each of the paintings is, if you see what I mean, very similar. It's of course different. Each painting is different, each painting is unique. Nevertheless, it is Chagall. Now, when you read my first poem, which I read, and you hear the second or third poem that Chuck read, I doubt that you would say, oh, that's a Prabhu poem. If I'm very lucky and you like my poem, you might say it's a poem I like by Prabhu. But you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that's definitely a Prabhu poem. If you read Gerard Manley Hopkins, you know it's a Hopkins poem because the tricks he's using in his poetry, if you see what I mean, if you'll allow me to use the word tricks, are very similar in all his poems. So when you come across a Hopkins poem, you know it's a Hopkins. When you come across a T.S. Eliot poem, you know it's a T.S. Eliot poem. When you come across a John Milton poem, you know it's a Milton poem. That's not the case with me yet. I think there are some of my poems where if you heard one of them and you hear a second one, you would say, oh, that's definitely a Prabhu poem. But that would not be the case with all of them because I write in such a variety of styles over such a variety of topics. And some of my poems are about India because obviously I'm from India. My heart is still there. I was deeply formed and shaped by my country, my culture. And so a lot of my poetry is about that. But of course, a lot of our tradition, my Indian tradition, is about spirituality. And having become a follower of Jesus, I comment on Indian spirituality in a totally different way compared to most Indians who are writing about Indian spirituality because they're writing from within the tradition. And I'm writing from within the tradition in a sense that I know it, but I'm now a follower of Jesus, so I write about it differently. So the themes, the topics, everything that I write about is very different. A lot of my poems, as I said, are about pain. Some of my poems are about my wife's death and, what followed after. Let me see if I can remember one of my haiku and recite it from memory. This one is titled A Mathematical Bridge. You may know that in Cambridge, there's a bridge called the Mathematical Bridge. And it's called the Mathematical Bridge because it is built without nails. And so, and the structure is very symmetrical. So you can tell that it's something mathematical about it. And I think the man who designed it was also a mathematician. So it's called the Mathematical Bridge. And I was at the Mathematical Bridge one Christmas day, and I was looking at it and thinking about it. And this haiku came to me. How boring is Christ? How boring is mathematics? How boring is Christ? How boring is maths? The key to the universe. Now you can see that it's a haiku. It has the shape of a haiku. It has 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. You see it has the turn in the second line. How boring is Christ? How boring is maths? The key. And then the turn in the thought brings you to the last line, to the universe, which is again 5 syllables, right? So you can see it's a totally intellectual poem, but it is quite totally different from anything else that you've heard this evening from me. Japanese form, about mathematics, very different. So perhaps that suggests to you my dilemma, that I'm writing in a great scattered range of forms and thoughts and topics and themes and all that, but I haven't yet found my voice.
Prabhu, in this last poem, your voice was courageous.
Would you like to? Oh, you mean the Mathematical Bridge one?
Yes. To
Yes.
start a poem by saying, how boring is Christ, that's a courageous statement.
But I hope it is a statement that a lot of people who are not believers will relate to.
Yeah. Well, go on. Yeah.
And that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm trying to relate to people who are not believers in my poetry and trying to find a bridge to them.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I think it's profound.
Would you like to read another of the poems, or
Yes,
are
I
there
can.
other comments or questions?
This is called I Cried for You. Now, I want to remind everybody this book of poetry by Prabhu was published 48 years ago in 1975. And anyway, I cried for you hard tears, though few, but once before. And now that you are gone, I wonder if I did right in taking you for myself, sharing those days, this city, all we did together, my life briefly with you. I wonder if we will meet again, if I will be hurt deeply as I was once by you as well. But pay no heed to this, my love, born of my insecurity, which burgeons when you are away. Let it bother me alone, for as I share it with the one who has taken my hand in his, I feel what I have never felt before. That all is as it should have been, and that someday, when it is time, you will be sent back to me.
Yeah, and she was. And we were married for 43 years.
Hmm. Oh, my dear friend. Mhm. And she was very wonderful.
Yes.
Mhm.
I wish I was able to share some of the poems that I have that I wrote after Philippa was promoted to heaven. But what I'll do is, oh, Natalie might have some of them. I sent one or two of them to Natalie.
Yes, I have on Pia's sickness. I
Would
may
you like
have
to
some
read that?
from last year as well.
Yes. Would you like to read on Pia's sickness?
Yes, I'll be happy to. Okay. On Pia's sickness. I must be strong. I need to cry. My chest is tight. My eyes are full. My lip is bit, so I keep dry. Fight thoughts that throng and images and memories and feelings too. I need to cry. I must be strong. I need to rest. I need to share. My mind, my heart, my inner eye seek someone who has gone this way and all such ways. For folk like me, with folk like me who hurt, who cry, who must be strong. That's beautiful, Prabhu.
That was written in the middle of nursing Philippa. She was down with cancer, and I was nursing her for 2 years. And a very difficult space to be in. And that poem came from that. Yeah. Is there another one you have there in relation to Philippa somewhere?
Let's see. Prabhu, I'll do a little bit of searching up what I have if you want to share some other thoughts.
Yeah. Chuck might want to read another poem meanwhile. He's got the book there.
Mhm.
Prabhu, if I may, I just appreciate your transparency in your writing. I have a similar story. My wife went to the Lord after 39 years of marriage. And I really identify with what you just expressed of needing to cry and needing to be strong, and the irony of that calling. I see that your voice is informed very much by your experience. And I think that's true of all of us.
Yeah.
You bring yourself through your writing, and whatever our medium, I think.
Yeah.
As you talked, I was thinking that we all share the image of God, but our voice is the image of God in us uniquely, and there's no duplicate as
Very
God
true.
to express his image of God in
Yeah.
in you and in me and in all of us. So just thank you very much.
Yeah,
Prabhu,
my
I have not
condolences. I know
found.
how tough it is.
Oh, sorry, go
Go
ahead.
on.
I have not found another one on Pippa, but I did find one of your nonsense poems.
Oh, lovely. Why don't you read one of those?
This one is fantastic. I found love in a tumble dryer. She found love at a takeaway fryer. He found love on a trapeze wire. They found love while flying higher. To escape the government prior, all of them fled through the Blackwood mire. Getting wedding clothes on hire. If the clothes didn't fit, they resorted to the dyer. To save their relationship from a pyre, all they wanted was a choir, an exchange of precious gem with a lute and a lyre, and the pastor leading them. They were glad to dance a gyre, and they lived happily ever after, dear masters, dear sire. I read that one to my children to great glee whenever I first read it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing my prize-winning poet friend thinks is my best work.
Mm.
I guess because it's most accessible and most enjoyable.
Mm. Wow.
I am looking for more.
Mhm.
And as you can see, even in that nonsense poem, I'm trying to write from a biblical point of view, so that the fun opens the door, if you're willing to see it, to something beyond just the fun. Because the dancing of the gyre is being led by whom? It's being led by a pastor. Not what you normally think of a pastor doing. You think of a pastor, standing solemnly and pronouncing the vows and going through the ceremony and whatever. But here the pastor is leading the dance.
Mm.
Mm.
I had a thought, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was wondering your thoughts on the idea. I was pondering what you had said about how your professional poetry friend, prefers the more silly poems, and you said that they might be more accessible, but that you have put more heart into the pain poems. And I sometimes think when I write, there are certain things that have mass appeal, and I think that that's good. And I think we can work within that space where there are things that have mass appeal. But the things that are closest to our heart, the thing that's closest to my heart, I know when I write them that few people will be able to identify or understand them or mine out what it really means. And in some way, I almost feel like that makes it more sacred, that there's some things that anybody can enjoy that everybody reads, but the most
Yeah.
sacred things are the things that only someone who can identify with it gets it. And it doesn't so much bother me that the others don't. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's true, but there's also such a thing as the difficulty of the form. So the nonsense poem is a kind of form that anybody can enter into very easily. But the more complex the poem, the more difficult it is sometimes to crack the code, as it were, of the poem. So not everybody is willing to invest the time and energy. Not everybody has the tools to be able to invest the time and energy into cracking the code of that particular poem. And so the audience becomes smaller and smaller. But on the other hand, the audience becomes more, how shall I put it, qualified to have a view of the poem. And in a way, I'm trying to reach through my poems, not just the mass. I'm happy to reach the mass with my nonsense poems and other things like that. I have a poem on the nose, for example, written for children, which has got into 2 anthologies for children's poems and so on. So I'm very happy with that. But the poems that are most difficult intellectually, poetically, are also the poems that may ensure the longevity of my work. Because the people who decide whether a poet is worth paying attention to, who recommend your work, who give prizes to your work, who prescribe your work for study and so on, these are the gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers are as important to reach as the masses, because I can reach the masses today with my poems, but whether I reach the masses 100 years after I'm gone with my poems will depend on the gatekeepers.
That's right. That's right. Prabhu, I have a poem in front of me that's entitled Freeze. Would you like for me to read it?
Please, please. Freeze is another lovely one. And this, for those who don't know, goes back to a children's game called Freeze. Some of you may have played it. And in school, I used to play it. And you suddenly said to somebody, freeze, and they were supposed to freeze in that position. Then you said, okay, you can now move. And that's the game that's behind. It's not really a game. It's a kind of fun thing to do, which is behind this particular poem.
Freeze. Over is the game when God blows the whistle, but the timing's always wrong. However long and late in coming, however tragically short. The keeper's arm rising to the incoming ball, or the ball flying right for the goal, with the keeper turning late. Suddenly one sees each life, however strange and twisted, all the hopes, ambitions, fears, desires, instantly chipped out, chiseled into revealing shape. The man, the woman, child, hale or hurt, privileged, differently abled, black, blue, brown, yellow, red, or whoever beyond, between, inside out or outside in, each motive thought, finally now blazing clear. And the last line is in a parentheses. Meditation of my father's funeral pyre on his death anniversary.
So if you did not have that line in brackets at the end, the poem would still be the poem. And you might like it or you might not like it. You might think it's a good poem or a okay poem. But when you understand the context, that it's written looking at my father's dead body burning, wasn't at that moment, of course, but looking back on it. Does that add anything to your appreciation of the poem? I wonder. What do people think?
It's a different level of thinking.
In what way then?
Building the bridge from freeze and the other descriptions you have of what happens when things stop, to thinking about, oh, this is Prabhu's dad, a funeral pyre. My, what happened? When? How? That's what, it's a different level of thinking. I began thinking of you more than thinking of the poem itself.
So was it a distraction for you? Or was it an enrichment? Or what did you feel about the poem, having been distracted, as it were, by the thought that it was actually about my father's funeral pyre?
Not a distraction.
An illumination,
Yeah.
which then allows you to go from the general to the human to then the personal, and you can experience it differently for yourself in comparison to your own griefs.
Yes, so poetry, on the one hand, gives you the intellectual delight of being able to see the pattern of the poem. And not all poems have that kind of pattern, but the poems that do have that kind of pattern, you can enjoy aesthetically. And if the poem has an intellectual dimension, that's great. You can appreciate the intellectual dimension. And sometimes poetry is very intellectual. But I think the best poems touch you also personally. They touch your heart. They make you feel something quite different. They take you to a different place. They transport you, they move you. And sometimes it's not the poem itself, but it's some little detail such as that, which is at the end here in brackets, or possibly in an epigraph. You may know that some poets use a line of quotation from another poet or a historical figure or leader of some sort. And you look at the poem and you look at the epigraph, the line at the top, and you start seeing a relationship between them. And in seeing the relationship between them, you suddenly are touched by something. And that is partly what poetry tries to touch you one way or the other. And the best poems touch you very deeply.
Yeah.
I think we have 7 minutes left. Is that right?
A minimum.
Okay. So do any of the others on the call want to say anything or ask anything?
I just want to thank you for touching our hearts. You know, just very thankful for your vulnerability and your poetry.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chuck, would you like to
where
read
would
another?
people be able
Sorry.
to access your poems? Do you want to share that information?
If I can send a set to you, Natalie, then you could just circulate them to people, and then they would perhaps, you know, if they want to enjoy it when they have a moment, that would be lovely.
Indeed.
When my computer starts working again, I'll be able, you know, when it's restored and repaired and whatever, then I'll get around to sending it.
I see that Liviu has his hand up. Liviu's a sculptor, but also a poet from Romania. Go ahead, Liviu.
Liviu,
Sculptor and a sculpture.
Liviu, are you the person whose sculpture I saw in Cambridge?
Yes, I am.
Ah, I recognize you now. Of course, I can see you and recognize you, Liviu. How lovely to see you. And
Same
it's a
here.
wonderful sculpture that you had in Cambridge. Really moving set of sculptures, actually. Really moving.
Yeah, somebody wanted to put us in contact and did not work. Yeah. I would like to come back a little bit on a very important subject that you raised, the one that you have a voice or not. Here, the subject is very important because everybody in his world would like to have a voice. And what does it mean? Is to have a style. You mentioned several artists that have a clear style. Yeah. And this is extraordinary. It is a peak. When working hard, you get to that point to have your own style is extraordinary. It's a victory, very important victory. But let's think a little bit about the opposite. To have a style is also an expression of your limitation. This is what you do. This is what you can. It's extraordinary, but it describes your limitations. This is what you can do. So, in order to have a voice, as you are searching to have your own voice, the question that raised up is very important. In front of whom I want to have a voice? In front of humans, that they will recognize myself immediately, or in front of God. So through whatever I do, I can do for the love of my Lord, and he will recognize my voice. Whatever I do, whatever style I'll have. So from my perspective, to have a style, to have a voice is less than to be free in your creation and to do it for the sake of the Lord, whatever it is, not trying to get yourself in a square to be easy for others to identify you.
That's a very profound statement, Livio. Very profound statements. Thank you. Thank you.
I am thinking about that, for myself. I ask my dear wife so many times, am I a sculptor or not? Searching for my voice. But if art is my way of meeting God, of worshiping God, then I try to let me free and just tell him through my work, whatever I feel, however I feel, not searching for something specific, just searching for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do we
Can I
make?
say something?
Oh, go ahead, Damaris.
No, just because I had this thought when he was, I was thinking about like Picasso, for example. He always had a different style for me, different season, and I love his creativity, so it wasn't just one way, there was just different seasons. So, and now I just had this thought when you were sharing that, you don't have your style, but I was thinking, no, but that's, yeah. So I agree with what if you said there's no limitation to God's creativity. And sometimes he gives us more than we can handle.
Sure.
Yeah, this question brings us to the deepest motivation of what we do. Do we create for people's sake, for money, for glory, or do we create for the sake of our Lord? And our creation, in fact, is our dialogue with our Heavenly Father. This is what I try to be when I get into my studio, a kid I forgot to tell you, but my father is a sculptor. So I get in his studio, it's not mine. I get there and I ask my daddy, what do you want to do today? What do we play today? What we'll do together? What you want me to do? And this is the essence of my work, not to get something clear, to have a voice in front of people. Then whatever they will feel, that whatever people will think about is their problem. That is not my problem.
I think spiritually, Livio, you're far ahead of me. I think I'm sometimes talking to God and you know, writing for him, and sometimes it's just my own thoughts or my own feelings or my own observations which lead to something in which the Lord is, as it were, a bystander, and I offer it to him at the end, if you see what I mean, rather than start with him at the beginning. And
yeah,
sometimes
the process is the essence, you know, not the end, you know, but how we do things, how we mix with God in the process.
Livio, I've been thinking a lot about your short poem Refugee and the statement that it makes. And I wonder if you can talk about that. And something I've been thinking also is that seems to me it's both a heart and a mind starting place, right?
Oh, come on, don't mention my poems. They're nothing, you know. But I would just mention something about my sculptures, where I try to focus that everything that I try to express, I to you now in this talk, I got the privilege to incorporate in my works. For about 15 years, I got this idea to make the light be part of the sculpture. Generally, a sculpture is a volume, and the light stays, reflects on that reality. But what I try to do is to make such transparent objects as the ones you've seen in Cambridge, such objects that light is part of the object. Now, this is what I'm talking also about, the process of creation, that God is part of that. It's not just something that I dedicate at the end of the work.
yeah. I've just found another of my poems on the internet. May I read that?
Please.
Quantity we can assess. Divide we will till every mite is chopped. Relationality we lose when microscope and telescope we only peer. Reality to seek we lotus sit, eye closed, or stand one leg, hand raised, or lie on bed of nails, inert, withdrawn, aloof, far from what's right or just or good or kind. Truth, reality to seek. We want an eye alight, a mind awake, a heart that's warmed with other hearts in touch, a hand that works injustices to move, so healed, so whole. So that's 3 stanzas of 4 lines each. Not all the lines are of equal length. They don't scan quite the same way. But the first one is the first paragraph, the first stanza is a general statement, opening the question of our tendency to measure everything, quantify everything, analyze everything, and so on. And then suggesting that in Indian civilization, we don't do that. Our quest for reality is rather different. Our quest for reality is spiritual, and our quest for reality actually takes us away from reality. And in the third stanza, I talk about the spirituality of Jesus without actually mentioning Jesus anywhere. Truth, reality to seek, we want an eye alight, a mind awake, a heart that's warmed with other hearts in touch, a hand that works injustices to move, so healed, so whole.
Nikos.
A couple of questions from a musician's perspective. I don't know. Can you hear me? No, not very clearly.
A little louder, please.
Louder, okay. I
The mic.
a couple of questions from a musician's perspective. Has any of your poetry been set to music? Any poems that have been set to music, perhaps?
None of them so far. When you receive them through Natalie, maybe you'll be encouraged, inspired to set some of them to music. I'd be most interested to hear that, to see that.
Okay, and relate. Yes, I cannot promise, of course, anything. It's the first time I hear your poetry, and I really don't understand everything because also the connection sometimes gets a little bit not so clear, and maybe you lose one word here, one word there, and you know what I mean. But once someone has it in front of him, or in a paper or whatever, it becomes more clear. But related to the first question, do you ever think about that in terms of I want to create something that will be closer to lyrics? Maybe it's not the right expression, but I mean, do you write with absolute freedom always, or sometimes you have this thought about making it in such a way that it makes it more possible to maybe be said to, how do you say that? Become a song. I'm sorry, maybe my description is not perfect, but I hope you understand.
Yeah, I do. So some of my poems are in free verse, and that would, of course, be very difficult to set to music, unless it's very modernistic music, which is possible. Also formless sort of music, if you see what I mean, which is possible. But some of my poems are written in a way that they could be set to music quite easily. For example, the nonsense poem that Natalie read. That's an absolutely regular rhyme and so on, rhythm and all that. So that would be relatively easy to set to music. So both kinds of poems are there. And when you read them, I'd be most interested to see what happens in terms of musical accompaniment for them.
Okay, we will see. Thank you.
That's a great question, Nikos. I love it.
Nikos
It
has
is.
done some beautiful work setting verses or to orchestration.
Yes.
Really?
Really,
Wow.
really beautiful.
That's lovely.
Yeah, Prabhu, I will send you a couple of examples that I have. Nikos, you may have some things that are much more recent than what I have. So if you do, feel free to send them to the group.
All right.
That'd be lovely.
Thank you for your kind words, Natalie. Allow me to add the comment that there are surprises sometimes, actually very often in relation to free form versus what is the opposite. What I'm trying to say is that something that looks, that is completely free might open the way or lead in a different way than what one would think as more convenient, but nevertheless, it might lead to something beautiful. Although when you start, you look at it and you think, oh my God, what am I going to do with this thing? You know, but again, maybe I'm not my description is not very clear, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. And
Yeah.
I recently worked on Psalm on a selection of verses from Psalm 90, and my first thought was to search for a poetic rendering of the psalm. Okay, but I was able to create something which is a work for choir, which at least for my ears, it works well. It is not a song with a verse and the chorus, a verse and the chorus, but it is a beautiful thing to see how something that looks, when you first look at it, impossible maybe to set it to music, what new ways or doors it might open.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. May I ask a show of hands, who among us write poetry? Not professionally necessarily, but if you write poetry, would you raise your hand? Okay, leave you, Egle, Joshua. Am I missing some? Dinus? Natalie? Yeah. I've written 1.5 poems in my life, and so my hand's not going up.
And Leanna?
Eliana?
And Kaya was raising hand.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
Well, I have heard someone say that poetry is the highest form of literature. I believe it. I wish I could attain to that at some point, but we don't have much longer now. Anyone else want to make a comment to Prabhu? Bob, you're on mute. Bob, did you raise your hand?
Can't hear you.
Well, I didn't, but I will just say, I think you have helped me remember why art in whatever form matters. It causes me to slow down and look at deeper meaning. And it juices life like you would juice an orange. It squeezes so that we can see more of this short time we have on earth in a perspective of eternity. So thank you for slowing me down today and helping me juice my life.